Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
There are moments in life that split the air so sharply you can almost hear the silence crash down afterward like broken glass. That's exactly what happened the night I thought I was finally getting it right, the night I let my guard down long enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, the third time would be the charm. We were gathered in the backyard of a rustic Italian restaurant just outside of Charleston. String lights danced overhead in the warm spring air, and the scent of rosemary and grilled lemon chicken drifted through the laughter. My dress was simple, pale blue, and my hair was pinned in loose curls that had already started to fall by dessert. Caleb looked good. Strong. Present. Like a man you could build something with. And for a moment, surrounded by the murmur of close friends and family, I believed this engagement dinner might actually mark a new beginning. Then Jason stood up. He was holding a glass of red, already 2 drinks deeper than his usual limit, and had that smug half-smile he gets when he thinks he's about to be clever. My older brother, the golden child who never missed a chance to jab at me under the guise of just being honest. I remember how his wife stiffened beside him, Melissa, with her tight jaw and perfect posture, as if she already knew something stupid was coming and couldn't stop it in time. Jason raised his glass and cleared his throat, tapping a knife gently against the side. The clinking hushed the table. People turned. Caleb reached over and gave my hand a squeeze under the table, his thumb stroking my knuckle like a quiet promise. I gave him a half-smile, unaware of the bomb about to go off. So Jason began, with the tone of someone pretending to toast when he's really about to twist the knife. Let's all raise a glass to Lena and Caleb. Third time's the charm, right? A few awkward chuckles bubbled up. I froze. Seriously, he added with a sharp little grin, hope this one lasts longer than the last two. And just like that, the air was gone. You ever watch a room turn inside out? That moment where every smile disappears in perfect unison and everyone suddenly finds their salad real interesting? Yeah, that. Melissa closed her eyes tight. My mother looked at her plate. A few people tried to laugh it off. One guy even muttered, "Jesus, Jason," under his breath. But the worst part wasn't even what he said. It was what came after. Caleb didn't miss a beat. Didn't shift in his seat or even blink. He just raised his glass, looked Jason dead in the eye, and said, "She was the one who left." With good reason. Then he drank. Like he'd just finished placing the final tile in a game he hadn't told me we were playing. Silence. Heavy, brutal silence. My stomach clenched like a fist. I wanted to stand, scream, do anything to stop the freight train that was clearly already halfway through the dining room, but I just sat there frozen with a smile so fake it made my cheeks ache. That night was supposed to be about love. About moving forward. But it turned into a slow-motion replay of everything I'd tried to outrun. I got up slowly and walked inside, past waiters who turned their heads politely and guests who pretended not to stare. I locked myself in the women's bathroom, gripping the sink with both hands. My reflection looked like a ghost in heels. My lipstick had faded. My eyes were shining with the tears I refused to let fall. That's when I felt the buzz in my purse. I pulled out my phone. One new message. Andrew. My first ex-husband. The one who taught me to walk on eggshells in my own home, and then called it communication problems. The one who once tracked my location because he didn't trust my sense of direction. The text said, "Saw the news. You really never change, huh?" I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. I could have deleted it. Could have blocked the number, thrown the phone against the wall, screamed until my lungs gave out. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I slid down the tiled wall, sat on the cold floor in my overpriced heels, and stared at that message like it was written in blood. Because what nobody tells you is that humiliation doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water under a locked door. And in that moment, I knew the dinner wasn't just a disaster. It was a warning. A crack in the foundation. And once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. The ride home was quiet in the worst possible way, not the kind of calm that comes from peace, but the kind that simmers just beneath the surface, threatening to boil over with every wrong word or sideways glance. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, his other resting lazily on the console, like he hadn't just detonated a grenade in front of my entire family. I stared out the window, counting each streetlight like a metronome, trying to measure my breath, trying not to scream. I didn't speak until we pulled into the driveway and the garage door began to groan its way open. When the engine stopped, I didn't move. I just turned my head and asked, low and even, "What the hell did you mean by that?" Caleb shifted in his seat, the sound of leather creaking louder than it had any right to be in the moment. "By what?" he said, like we were playing dumb now, like that's how this was going to go. "You know what?" I snapped, finally facing him full on. "At the table. With good reason?" "You said I left with good reason. Was that your version of defending me, or were you just twisting the knife a little slower than Jason?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, really looked, the way people do when they've made up their mind about you and now they're just waiting to see if you'll prove them right. "I meant what I said," he finally said, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. "You left. Both times. You didn't get left, Lena. You left. And maybe you had your reasons, but let's not pretend you didn't have a pattern." I laughed. A bitter, choking sound that didn't feel like mine. "A pattern? Jesus, Caleb, this isn't a dating app recap. You want to talk patterns? Fine. Let's talk about Andrew." And just like that, the memory came back with full color and sound, like someone had turned the projector on in my head without asking. Andrew, my first husband, the walking Wall Street cliché in a crisp white shirt and permanent scowl, had ambition like oxygen. He couldn't survive without being the smartest, richest, most respected man in the room. And God forbid I ever took up space in that room unless I was quietly making it easier for him to shine. The fights started small. A comment about my tone, my outfits, the way I laughed too loudly at parties. Then came the tracking apps he insisted were for safety, the calendar control, the money that slowly became his alone to manage. By the end of year 2, I wasn't allowed to grocery shop without a receipt and a follow-up text. The day I left him, I didn't even pack a bag. I just grabbed my purse, walked out the front door, and never turned back. "So yeah," I said, still staring at Caleb, I ran. I ran because I didn't feel like dying slowly in a house where silence was punishment and obedience was the only currency. Caleb didn't flinch. "And Miles?" he asked. My chest tightened. "What about him?" "Same deal," he said, a little too casual. "You ran then too. What was the good reason that time?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it's starting to look like you run when things get real." I wanted to hit him. Not physically, emotionally. I wanted to hit him with words so sharp he'd bleed out from the smugness. "You think you know everything because you've been here 6 months and watched me set the table twice a week and pick my nails when I get nervous?" I hissed. "You think you've got me figured out?" He didn't respond. Just opened the car door and stepped out, leaving me alone in the garage with a silence that felt even heavier than before. Be honest, if someone made that toast about you, would you smile and swallow it or throw a drink in their face? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm dying to know if I overreacted or not. Later that night, after we'd both pretended to sleep on opposite sides of the bed, I crept downstairs and opened my laptop. I hadn't touched this file in years, hadn't dared to, but now it felt like the only place left to breathe. There it was, in the drafts folder, where all the unsent confessions live. Subject: You never protected me. It was a letter I wrote to Jason after Miles and I imploded. I never hit send. I couldn't. But tonight, reading it again in the glow of the kitchen light, I felt every word like it was still fresh ink. I read the first line out loud to no one. "You stood by and watched them hurt me. And then you made me laugh like it never happened." My finger hovered over the send button. Because some ghosts don't go away. Some you have to exorcise yourself. It wasn't until the second glass of red that I knew I was going to send it. The letter I'd buried in the drafts folder of my life. written in a moment of raw truth and drunken clarity 3 years ago. Right after my second marriage exploded like a bad engine on a lonely highway. I hadn't looked at it in all that time, but now, with my heart pounding from the previous night's disaster and my head still buzzing from Caleb's quiet judgment, it felt like the only weapon I had left to throw. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was reckless, maybe I just wanted to hurt Jason the way he had hurt me with that smirking little toast, and the way he always dismissed my pain like it was a thing I'd made up for attention. I sat at the kitchen island, the only light coming from the cracked fridge door I'd left open after pouring myself another half-hearted glass. The letter was still there, untouched, its subject line glaring at me like an accusation. You never protected me. I hovered my finger over the send button for a long moment, not breathing, not blinking, not thinking about what came next. Then, without ceremony, I clicked. The message was gone. Sent. Out into the world where I could never take it back. And suddenly I didn't feel better. I felt naked, exposed, like I'd stripped off every layer of armor and walked willingly into a storm. I poured another drink and downed it too quickly, the burn cutting through the panic just enough to keep me upright. Then I went to bed and pretended I was still in control of the wreckage. The next morning, I woke up to a headache that felt like someone had stuffed my skull with bricks and regret. My phone had 3 missed calls, all from Jason, and a voicemail I didn't dare listen to. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in one hand and my breath in the other, waiting for the courage to deal with the consequences I had just invited into my house. But I didn't have to wait long. By 11 a.m., there was a loud knock on the door. No, not a knock, a pounding, the kind that doesn't ask permission but demands entry. I opened it to find Jason standing on my porch, jaw clenched, eyes full of something that wasn't quite rage, but sure as hell wasn't peace. He was still wearing last night's shirt, his hair disheveled, and for a split second I wondered if he'd slept at all or if he'd just spent the whole night stewing in the words I had finally forced him to face. You sent it, he said, not waiting for a greeting, stepping inside like he owned the place. Yes, I said, standing my ground even though my legs felt like water. You sent that goddamn letter, he repeated, voice rising now, closing the door behind him with a shove. 20 years, Lena. 20 goddamn years I kept my mouth shut. I covered for you. I took heat from Mom, from Dad, from every relative who thought you were going off the rails, and this is how you thank me. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I wasn't ready for his version of the truth. I wasn't ready for the way his eyes looked like they might spell with something far deeper than anger. You didn't protect me, I finally said, voice shaking in a way I hated, a way I thought I'd grown out of. I begged you. You remember that? I was 15. I came to you after he touched me, after he locked the bathroom door behind me, and you told me I was being dramatic. You told me not to ruin his life. Jason's face twisted, and for the first time in years, I saw the guilt behind the smugness. He leaned back against the wall like the words had physically hit him. I was a kid too, he said, quieter now, though still shaking. I didn't know what to do. He was Dad's best friend. He'd been around since we were in diapers. And you have no idea what it was like, the pressure I felt to pretend like everything was okay. I wasn't asking you to fix it, I snapped, every word laced with decades of held-back fire. I was asking you to believe me. His eyes flicked to the floor. For a moment, all the fire drained from him. I did, he said, almost a whisper. I did believe you. I just didn't know how to handle it. So I shut it down. I told myself maybe you exaggerated, maybe it was just weird and not what you said it was. I crossed my arms, heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack through my ribs. And now? He looked at me again, and there it was, raw, broken regret. Now I know you were telling the truth. I've known for a while. But saying it out loud, it made it real. And if it was real, then that means I let it happen. I let you stay in that house. The silence between us stretched long and cruel. You didn't just let it happen, I said, voice brittle. You helped me forget it. Every joke, Every time you told me I was crazy, every time you let Mom sweep it under the rug, you made me question my own memory. Jason didn't respond. He just stood there, breathing heavy like the air had thickened with everything we had both never said. After a few seconds, he pushed away from the wall and stormed out, slamming the door behind him without another word. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by ghosts and broken trust, and felt like a wound that had just been ripped wide open. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to close it. Because maybe it needed to bleed. There's a unique kind of silence that settles into a house when everyone inside has said too much and yet not nearly enough, a heavy, pregnant stillness that clings to the air like smoke after a fire. The morning after Jason stormed out of my house, I found myself staring at a pile of unwashed dishes in the sink, remnants of meals eaten by people who were now either furious with me or pretending not to care. The engagement dinner had turned into a slow-motion demolition, and now I was left picking through the rubble alone, trying to figure out which pieces were even worth salvaging. My mother called around 10 that morning. Her voice came through the phone like a slap wrapped in a silk glove. "I just got off the phone with your brother," she said, skipping pleasantries entirely, the way she always did when she was angry and pretending not to be. "He's very upset, Lena. You blindsided him." I stood in my kitchen barefoot, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't taken a sip of, my eyes fixed on the window like it might show me a version of the world where any of this made sense. "He's upset," I said, my voice dry and distant. "He's upset because I finally told him the truth?" "You always did have a flair for exaggeration," she said, and just like that, I was 15 again, standing in the living room after telling her about the man who had cornered me in the basement, only to be met with that same damn phrase, spoken in the same disapproving tone. As if I was some overdramatic child inventing monsters to make herself feel important. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a molar. "It wasn't exaggeration, Mom. It was trauma. It was abuse." There was a long pause on her end, the kind where you can hear someone choosing the safest words they can muster while still protecting their own comfort. "I just think bringing it up now after so many years, it's not helpful. Not for the family. Not for you." That was her version of love, silence, suppression, and the eternal maintenance of a perfectly manicured image. I ended the call without another word, letting the phone drop to the counter with a dull thud. I couldn't listen to her smooth, polished sentences anymore. Not when I was finally learning how to speak. I found Caleb in the garage later that day, pretending to organize the shelves, although it was obvious he wasn't really doing anything but avoiding the tension that had infected every room in the house. His back was to me, and he didn't turn around when I spoke. "So," I said, voice taut and clipped, "are you going to pretend none of this is happening too?" He sighed, wiping his hands on an old rag. "I'm trying to stay out of it, Lena. I didn't sign up for a family civil war." The words landed hard, not because they were cruel, but because they were so honest. Too honest. "You're not staying out of it when you're already in it," I snapped. "You made that clear when you opened your mouth at the dinner table." He finally turned to face me, eyes tired, jaw tight. "You don't get it. I've done the whole dysfunctional family routine before. The secrets, the grudges, the emotional landmines. I lived it for 10 years with my ex's mess. I'm not sure I've got it in me to do it again." It was the first time I saw it in his face, not anger, not annoyance, but doubt. Real doubt. The kind that starts small and grows slowly, like mold in the corners of something you thought was clean. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles," I said, a little softer now. "I'm asking you not to flinch when they get messy." He didn't respond. Just went back to pretending to reorganize screws that didn't need organizing. That night, I poured myself another drink I didn't really want and opened my old email account, the one I hadn't touched in years, the one filled with messages I'd never had the strength to delete. Miles lived in those messages. Miles, the charming, thoughtful man who had swept into my life like a breath of fresh air and slowly turned it into a fog I couldn't escape. He was the kind of man who could convince you were losing your mind while kissing you on the forehead and telling you he only wanted what was best for you. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He just planted seeds of doubt over and over until I stopped trusting my own memory. He was the one who told me I needed therapy, and then he found the therapist, a woman named Claire with soft eyes and an inviting smile, who he later slept with while telling me we needed to focus on ourselves individually before we could rebuild our bond. I was a shell by the time I left him. Not broken, not screaming, just hollow. As I scrolled through the inbox, I found it a message I had sent him just days before I left for good. The subject line made my stomach twist. Please, let's fix this. I'll do anything. I clicked it open, reading the words I barely remembered typing, the desperate tone, the misplaced guilt. I felt sick. Behind me, I heard Caleb's voice. Quiet. Cold. What the hell is this? I turned around to find him standing behind me, reading over my shoulder. He must have found the browser open. I didn't have time to close it. It's old, I said quickly. It's not what it looks like. But he was already backing away, shaking his head like he'd just seen something he couldn't unsee. You begged him to fix it? After everything he did to you? I was desperate, I said, standing up. I wasn't strong then. I didn't know how to leave. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Like he didn't know whether to comfort me or run. You say you've changed, he said slowly, but all I'm seeing is someone who keeps going back to the same fire, hoping it won't burn this time. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room. And I was alone again, with my past wide open. And no one left to close it for me. It was sometime after midnight when the real fight began. Not the shallow kind with raised voices and slammed doors, but the kind that slices beneath the skin, the kind that digs into marrow and unearths things neither of you wanted to see. Caleb had spent the last 2 days moving around the house like a ghost, not hostile, just cold, like he'd placed himself in some emotional quarantine, and I was the contagion. I caught him standing in the hallway that night, arms crossed, staring at a photo of us taken 3 months earlier on a hiking trip in Asheville, back when we still looked like a couple who knew where they were going. He didn't even look at me when he spoke, just kept staring at that damn photo like it held some secret code he couldn't decipher. You always make yourself the victim, Lena, he said flatly, the words landing like a slap to the face, one that had been coming for a long time if I was being honest. You spin everything into a story where you're the one who was wronged, the one who was pushed, the one who had no choice. I felt my chest tighten, my throat go dry, but I didn't look away. I wouldn't let him talk to me like I was some headline he didn't bother to read. You think you know my story just because you've seen the scars? I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking, but failing anyway. You think just because you've heard the highlight reel of my pain, you understand the full goddamn film? He turned to me then, jaw tight, eyes tired in that way people get when they've stopped hoping for clarity and started bracing for fallout. I think you run. That's what I think. You ran from Andrew, from Miles, from your family, and now you're standing there like I'm the one doing the damage because I'm not clapping for your bravery. I should have walked away. I should have let it cool. But I didn't. Because there are some words that drag old bones out of the closet whether you want them or not. There are some truths that don't knock first. You think I started running with Andrew? I asked, laughing bitterly, the sound catching in my throat. I started running long before that. I almost got married when I was 20, you know. Right after college, to this guy named Paul. He was quiet, sweet, never raised his voice. We got engaged 6 months after dating because I thought stability looked like love. Caleb didn't move. He just stood there, waiting, eyes narrowing the longer I spoke. But I didn't show up to the wedding, I said, blinking hard, willing myself not to break in front of him. I packed a bag and disappeared for almost 2 years. Nobody knew where I went. Not my friends, not my family. I just vanished. He raised an eyebrow, like he was trying to decide whether I was telling the truth or just spinning another narrative to avoid accountability. Why? He asked, simple and sharp. I took a deep breath and said it before I could stop myself. Because I was pregnant. And I didn't tell him. Or anyone. Silence. I stayed with a friend in Arizona. I continued. Got a job waiting tables, changed my name on social media, cut ties with everyone. When the baby came, I held him for exactly 5 minutes before I signed the papers. I gave him up. And then I came back like it never happened. The air in the hallway thickened like smoke. Caleb didn't speak, didn't blink. And for once, I didn't try to explain or justify it. I let the truth hang there between us like a raw nerve. You think I run, I said, voice low now, almost calm. And maybe I do. But not because I'm a coward. I run because sometimes staying feels like a slow death. Because there are choices I made that I have to live with every single day. You want to talk about victims? Fine. But don't you dare reduce me to one. Before he could answer, before he could even process the weight of what I'd just told him, the doorbell rang. We both froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Certainly not this late. Caleb walked past me to the front door and opened it without a word. And standing there, arms crossed, was a girl in her early 20s with sharp features and fury in her eyes that looked just like his. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice ice cold. Nice to know I'm the last to find out you're playing house again. Caleb blinked, caught off guard, his hand still on the doorknob. What are you doing here, Grace? He asked, the kind of question that's less curiosity and more panic dressed in politeness. She looked past him and saw me, standing barefoot in the hallway, wearing a robe and nothing close to an explanation. So this is her, she said, lips curling into a smirk that didn't match the hurt in her voice. The woman who's been feeding you her sob stories while slowly turning you against everyone else. I took a step forward, instinctively wanting to defend myself, but she held up a hand. Don't bother, she said. I've seen this before. The broken bird act. You're just another woman who uses her pain to manipulate men into thinking they're the only ones who can save her. Caleb tried to interrupt, but she was already stepping back onto the porch. I just came to say goodbye, she said. I'm done. You want to play therapist to this mess? Be my guest. But don't expect me to stick around and watch it happen. And then she was gone. Just like that, another door closed. And another crack split open. The invitation came in the form of a text message, as casual and harmless as a beer commercial, just a line from Jason that read, "Let's do a family roast night. Clean the air. Have some laughs. Could be good for us." At first, I laughed out loud, actually laughed, like he'd suddenly developed a sense of irony. A family roast from the man who'd turned my engagement dinner into a public gutting? But then, against my better judgment and fueled by some pathetic, half-drunk sliver of hope, I responded with sure. Why not? Because that's how deep it goes, the yearning to be seen, to be understood, to finally stop holding your breath around the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally and yet make you feel like an unwanted guest at your own table. The evening was set at our mother's house, that same pale yellow ranch on the edge of town where nothing had changed since the 90s, not the sun-faded wallpaper, not the fridge magnets shaped like fruit, not even the feeling that every room was hiding something unsaid. The backyard was strung with lights, and the grill was smoking, and for a moment it looked like a real gathering, the kind of warm, loud family affair you'd see in commercials or Hallmark movies, full of paper plates and harmless teasing. Caleb came with me, though things between us had turned stiff, like we were both wearing the wrong-sized skin. We hadn't talked much since his daughter's surprise visit, and every conversation now felt like it had razor wire coiled underneath it. Jason kicked off the roast with a beer in one hand and a plastic mic in the other, like he was hosting amateur night at a comedy club no one wanted to be at. "We're here to celebrate my little sister Lena," he began, voice syrupy and fake, who's been through more husbands than a Vegas wedding chapel but still believes in love. Gotta admire that kind of commitment, if only to starting over. Some people laughed, the kind of laughter that comes not from humor but discomfort, like they didn't know if laughing would make them part of the cruelty or part of the solution. Caleb didn't laugh. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the table in front of him like it might offer some kind of exit strategy. Then came Aunt Kathy, who always wore too much perfume and never met a story she couldn't hijack. She stood, clinked her glass, and said with a bright, brittle smile, "Lena's always been our drama queen, hasn't she? Ever since she was little, she had this savior complex, always rushing in with tears in her eyes, always making everything about her pain." Honey, I say this with love, but you sure do know how to center yourself in a crisis. The words hit harder than they should have, because they came sugar-coated, wrapped in the illusion of love, spoken by someone who thought kindness was measured by how softly you delivered the knife. I felt my face go still, my blood hum beneath the surface, and in that moment, something in me cracked, not loud, not messy, just quietly, like a hairline fracture you only notice when the pressure becomes too much to bear. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the patio. Every eye turned to me. The backyard suddenly felt too small, like the air had been sucked out of it. "You want a roast?" I said, voice steady but rising. "You want to crack jokes about how I ruin every relationship, how I always make things about me?" "Fine. Let's do it." Jason raised a hand, half laughing. "Hey now, let's not know," I cut him off. "Let's tell the whole story for once. Since we're so into honesty tonight." I turned to Kathy first. "You think I'm dramatic?" When I was 15, the man who used to come fix our plumbing cornered me in the basement and touched me while you were all upstairs drinking wine. I told Jason. He said I was exaggerating. I told Mom. She said not to ruin anyone's life. So I swallowed it. A stunned silence fell over the group, the kind that happens when you've just introduced truth into a space that's only ever run on denial. I turned to my mother, whose face had gone pale. "You remember that, don't you? You told me I probably misunderstood. That I was just emotional." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned to Jason next. "You want to know why I left home after college without saying a word? I was pregnant. And I gave up the baby. I didn't tell any of you because I knew what you'd say. You'd call it drama. Or selfishness. Or weakness." I paused, letting the silence grow heavy and sharp. "And Miles? You all loved him, right? Charming, funny, mature. He convinced me to go to therapy and then started sleeping with the woman he found to fix me. And I begged him to stay. You want to make fun of someone? There you go, laugh at the woman who begged her cheating husband to fix their marriage." By now, no one was laughing. Even the ones who'd smirked earlier were stone-faced, caught in the thick silence of consequence. Caleb was staring at me, eyes wide, mouth tight. I looked at him. "You want to say something too? You want to join the roast? Say I'm broken? Say I'm manipulative? Go ahead. Get in line." He stood slowly, his chair scraping back. "I need space," he said, voice barely audible, but every syllable felt like a hammer blow. Then he turned and walked out, down the steps, across the lawn. As he passed Jason, I heard him say something that stopped me colder than anything else had all night. "You were right." And just like that, the air shifted again. And I was no longer part of a roast. I was the remains of one. Burnt, blackened, and completely alone. The days bled into each other after Caleb left, each one a slow, gray ribbon of hours that felt hollow and distant, like I was watching my life happen from somewhere just outside the glass. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't even block me, just vanished into that space where people go when they're not angry enough to hate you but too tired to love you anymore. I kept checking my phone, like an addict waiting for a hit that wasn't coming, staring at the same empty inbox as if I could will it into forgiveness. But nothing came. Just silence, deep and punishing, wrapping itself around my ribs until even breathing felt like a betrayal. Eventually, I stopped expecting him to come back. Eventually, I got tired of pretending that pain could be paused if you just sat still enough. So I made a decision that felt, at the time, both insignificant and massive. I called a therapist. Not for a couples session, not to prove I was working on myself to win someone back, but for me. Just me. For the first time in my life, I sat across from someone and told the truth without angling it for sympathy or trying to make it sound prettier than it was. I didn't cry in the first session. I just sat there, picking at my sleeve and listing the things I had done, not to justify them, but to finally hear them out loud. And the weirdest part was how good it felt to stop lying to myself about who I had been. Therapy made me brave in ways I didn't expect. 2 weeks in, I dug out the old envelope from the back of my closet, the one with the adoption agency letter and the barely legible name I had scrawled on the release forms when I was 21 and shaking so badly I could hardly hold the pen. I looked at the name Emmett and whispered it out loud like a secret prayer. Then I drafted a letter, careful and raw, explaining who I was and why I was writing. I sent it through the agency, knowing they'd forward it only if the recipient agreed. No guarantee, no timeline, no promises. Just the beginning of a door being opened. He didn't respond. Not that week. Not the next. But something about sending it out into the world gave me a strange sense of peace. Like I'd thrown a bottle into the ocean and, for the first time, stopped watching the waves to see where it went. It was enough just to let it go. 3 weeks after the roast, Jason showed up on my porch again, this time not with anger or some thinly veiled lecture wrapped in brotherly concern, but with something I hadn't seen in a very long time, his vulnerability. He didn't knock right away. He stood there for a full minute, holding something in both hands, shifting his weight like he might change his mind. When I finally opened the door, his face looked older, not in the lines, but in the eyes, like whatever armor he wore had finally cracked under the weight of time and guilt. "I found this in Mom's attic," he said, holding up a faded photo, edges curled from decades in a shoebox. "It was the two of us, me maybe 9, him around 11, sitting on a swing set in our old backyard, both of us barefoot and laughing like the world couldn't touch us." I stared at it for a moment before taking it from him, unsure whether to thank him or close the door. "I lied," he said, eyes not meeting mine. "Back then, when you told me about what he did, I didn't just ignore it. I saw it. That day in the basement, I saw him follow you down there. I heard you crying. I stood at the top of the stairs and I froze. I didn't stop it. I didn't even try. My breath caught somewhere between shock and something deeper, something harder to name. He kept talking. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. That you were just upset. That if I said anything, it would blow up everything, and I didn't want to be the one who ruined the family. But it wasn't just fear. I chose to protect him. Because it was easier. For the first time, Jason looked at me and didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for absolution. He just stood there, hollow and honest, letting the truth sit between us like a wound too deep to suture. "I'm sorry," he said. "It doesn't fix anything. I know that. But I should have said it a long time ago." I didn't forgive him. Not then. But I let him sit with me on the porch. We didn't speak for a while. Just passed the photo back and forth, remembering a time when things were simpler, even if the simplicity had been a lie. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, phone face down beside me, my voicemail buzzed. I stared at it for a few seconds before pressing play. "Hi, this is Caleb." His voice was low, tired, maybe even uncertain. "I need to see you. There's something I haven't told you." The message ended there. No explanation, no apology, no hints, just those few words hanging in the dark like a whisper from another life. And just like that, the door I'd tried so hard to close cracked open again. Because unfinished things have a way of finding their way back, even when you're not ready for them. When he knocked on my door, it wasn't dramatic or desperate or even loud. It was the kind of knock that told me he wasn't sure if I'd even open it. I almost didn't. I stood there behind the door for a full 30 seconds, forehead resting against the frame, hand on the knob like it weighed 10 pounds more than it should. I could feel my heart thudding like a quiet drum in my chest, not from love, not from anger, but from that strange, aching place where unresolved things tend to live. And even as I told myself I should just let it go to voicemail, just leave the past in the past, I opened the door anyway. Caleb looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, eyes red around the edges, face unshaven, shoulders slouched in a way I hadn't seen before. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he was trying to figure out if I was still someone he knew or if I'd become something entirely different since he'd walked out of my mother's backyard. He held a paper cup of coffee in one hand, the kind with no lid, the kind you grab when you're too wrecked to bother with details. I didn't ask him in. I just stepped out onto the porch and let the door click softly shut behind me. We sat down on the bench together, the one we'd bought at a flea market the first week he moved in, when everything still felt like a shared future instead of two different pasts trying to coexist. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, and for a long moment we just sat there in the kind of silence that's heavy but not entirely uncomfortable. Eventually, he cleared his throat, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out slow, rough, like gravel under tired wheels. "There's something I never told you," he said, eyes fixed on the sidewalk in front of us. "About my last partner. The one before you." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "You asked once," he continued, "how she died. And I told you it was a car accident. That's what I let everybody believe. Her parents, her friends, even my daughter." The pause that followed was sharp enough to cut glass, and I could feel the skin on my arms rise with something colder than the breeze. "But it wasn't an accident," he said finally, words brittle and cracking at the edges. "She took her own life. Pills. Alone. In our apartment." I turned to look at him, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't see it coming," he said. "Not because she didn't show signs, she did. She said things, quiet things, things that meant something if I'd bothered to really hear them. But I was gone. Not physically. I was there on the couch, in the kitchen, in the bed next to her. But emotionally, I had shut down. I couldn't handle her grief, or her fear, or her pain. So I turned into stone and left her to drown." His fingers gripped the paper cup tighter, knuckles whitening. "And when she died, I told myself it wasn't my fault. That I wasn't responsible for someone else's choices. But deep down, I knew I helped dig the hole she never climbed out of." The weight of what he said hung between us like fog, and I felt it settle into my chest in a way that was equal parts sorrow and something else. Understanding, maybe, or recognition, or just that ache you get when you finally see the whole picture, not just the frame. "I was scared I was doing it again," he said, finally glancing over at me. "With you. When things started falling apart, I felt myself go cold. I saw the same pattern starting. I told myself walking away was the right thing, that you were too broken, too volatile. But the truth is, I left because I was terrified I'd kill you in the same quiet way I killed her." I looked at him then, really looked, and I saw the man I had fallen in love with, not the version he tried to project, not the tough, steady one who always seemed in control, but the scared, scarred one sitting beside me now, showing me a wound he had never let anyone touch. "I can't forgive you," I said, not harshly, not even coldly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm still here." He nodded slowly, as if that alone was more than he'd expected, maybe more than he deserved. "We didn't make promises. We didn't reach for each other. We just sat there in that quiet, fading light, side by side, no rings, no plans, no declarations, just two people carrying too much, trying to figure out if that weight could be shared instead of borne alone. Eventually, the sky began to darken, and the world around us slipped into that soft, in-between place where things either end or begin again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and without really thinking, I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was an email, from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "I think you might be my mom." I didn't open it. Not yet. Because sometimes, the beginning of something isn't a door being kicked open, it's a quiet knock on a part of your soul you thought was sealed for good. And I wasn't ready to walk away. But I wasn't ready to walk in either. I just stayed on that bench, breathing, waiting, listening to the weight of the silence, and wondering if, just maybe, this one might last.